Hi there, I'm Shant Dashjian, and this is the MDN Curriculum Review. In the previous video, we went over the Soft Skills module. Today, we will review the Environment Setup module. The goal of this module is to help familiarize yourself with the development environment and the tools you'll use as a web developer building websites and applications. Let's get started. The first thing the module recommends is that you know how to use your operating system, whether it's Microsoft Windows, Apple's Mac OS, or some flavor of Linux like Ubuntu. Next on the list is to know the basics of using a computer, like signing into your computer, connecting to the internet, and using basic system controls like your keyboard and mouse. After that, the module goes over installing 6 categories of tools you need as a web developer. First and foremost, you need to install a text editor. The curriculum recommends VS Code, which you can install from here. We will talk a bit more about text editors later in this video, but in a nutshell, you need an editor in order to create and edit your code. Next, you need to install a web browser. And for testing purposes, you need to install at least 2 out of the 3 families of web browsers. The first family is the Chromium family of browsers. Here we have Chrome, which is the most widely used browser out there. Or you could install the privacy-first Brave browser. From the Gecko browser engine, you can install Mozilla's Firefox browser. And from WebKit, you can install Apple's Safari. To test your application for the visually impaired, the module recommends you install Lynx, which is a text browser. You also want to install a local web server. But before you do that, the curriculum wants to make sure that you have a good foundation of understanding when it comes to the web. First, you want to know how the internet works. You can check out this article that explains that in detail. It has a couple of good videos that give you a very good idea. In a nutshell, imagine the internet being a group of computers connected to a router, which is connected to other routers, ultimately connected to your internet service provider. This, in turn, will connect to other internet service providers over the internet, which then connect to routers, ultimately connecting to other computers. Each one of those computers has an IP address, which is necessary for other computers to access it. The other important piece of knowledge is to learn what a web server is. And for that, you can check out this article with very good resources as well. In a nutshell, let's take a look at this graph here. When a user opens up their browser in order to access a website, they enter the website's URL in the address bar and hit enter. And from there on, the browser sends an HTTP request that will go over the internet all the way until it finds the web server that hosts the files that constitute the website being accessed. From there, the web server will send back an HTTP response which includes the files to show the website on the browser. You also need to understand why you need to install one on your own machine while you're developing the website or the application. Why can't you just run all your local files in the browser using file:/ when testing? There are 3 reasons for this. First, browsers won't run asynchronous requests from a local file, and that's for security reasons. Second, server-side languages like Python require a special server to interpret them. And lastly, browsers treat requests to load other files as cross-origin requests and block them by triggering a CORS error. What's a CORS? CORS is a mechanism that uses HTTP headers in order to enable the browser to decide whether to allow or block JavaScript code from accessing resources from another origin. You can check out this article for a detailed explanation. Now that you understand what a web server is and why you need it installed on your local machine, here are 4 ways you can install one on your machine. First, you can use a VS Code extension. Use this if you're only using front-end technologies and are not using a server-side language. For example, you can use Preview on web server or the live server VS Code extension. Another option is to use Node.js's own HTTP server or Python's HTTP server. If you're using a server-side or a backend or a full-stack web framework, those usually come with their own development server. Now, if you're doing your own design in addition to web development, you'll need a couple of more tools. You need a graphics editor, for example, the open source GIMP, or the Windows open source Paint.net. You'll also need a UI UX design tool like Figma, or my favorite open source alternative, Penpot. The last tool on the list here that you need to install as a web developer is a version control system. Git is the standard version control system, and if you have a Mac, it's already installed on your machine. But if not, you can install it here. You'll also need a remote repository hosting service, like GitHub. An important part of the development environment is your file system. So learn how to use it effectively. Learn how to use the Finder or Explorer if you're on Windows to find and manage your files. Follow best practices for your project folder structure. Have your HTML in an index.html, have your CSS files in a styles directory, have your JavaScript files in a scripts directory, have your images in an images directory. Follow the file naming conventions, use lowercase, have no spaces in the name, and use a hyphen rather than an underscore. For file paths, use a / rather than a /, even when developing on Windows. Learn how to create, move, rename, and delete your files and folders. Learn how to search for your files and folders. And when it comes to file extensions, learn how to show extensions on Windows and how to show hidden files on Unix. Lastly, learn how file types are associated with applications. We already talked about the available web browsers like Chrome and installing a web browser. But do you know the difference between a web browser, a web page, a website, and a search engine? Check out this article to learn more. You also need to use your search engine effectively. And we looked at this article before from The Guardian, and here we have 10 tips and tricks for effective Googling. Check it out. Another important part of your development environment and a very powerful tool is your terminal or the command line. So learn the basics of this tool. You can check out this crash course on the command line, and here we will summarize the important points. You need to know what the terminal or the command line is and what you can do with it. The terminal in a nutshell is a text-based interface into your system. How can you access it? On macOS and Linux, you already have a built-in Unix-based or Unix-like terminal. On Windows, you have the command prompt or the CMD, which is a limited DOS system interface. So if you are on Windows, the curriculum recommends that you use the Windows subsystem for Linux. Or you could use PowerShell or Git Bash, which comes with Git for Windows. On your terminal, learn the shortcuts like using up and down arrows to see previous commands and the tab for autocomplete. Learn the basic commands on your terminal like cd, ls, make dir, touch, grep, cat, move, and copy. And for the commands you use the most, learn the command options or flags. If you want to learn more about a command, you can check out the manual page. For example, I can learn more about the ls command by entering the command man ls. Now, if you're still learning how to use the terminal and experimenting with new commands, the curriculum recommends that instead of experimenting on your own machine, use Glitch, which offers a terminal, and here you can have a terminal where you can experiment with new commands. For user-friendly man pages, you can check out tldr.sh. In addition to the built-in commands on your terminal, you can install additional commands from npm. For example, you can install Prettier, which is an opinionated code formatting tool for front-end developer. And lastly, let's talk about code editors. Office editors like Microsoft Word are not suitable for editing code because they don't cleanly handle the output plain text. The default OS plain text editors like TextEdit have their own limitations. Therefore, the curriculum recommends that you use VS Code, which is a fully fledged and free code editor. IDEs, or integrated development environments like IntelliJ, are more advanced than VS Code, but they are also more complex. Whether you'll use a code editor like VS Code or a more advanced IDE, learn what a basic editor can do for you. Things like find and replace, things like syntax highlighting. In addition, learn how to customize and enhance your code editor or IDE with extensions. For example, you can add productivity extensions like code snippets. This concludes our review of the Environment Setup module from the MDN Curriculum. In the next video, we will go over the first module in the core section of the curriculum, and that is the Web Standards module. Until then, be well.